I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in anything. And then for 11 minutes, I died. What I saw changed everything I thought was real, and it began in the one place I swore I'd never return to. Jerusalem. This isn't a story about religion, it's a warning, and it's already happening. Before I say anything else, if you're listening to this, take a second to tap the like button, hit subscribe, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from, because what I'm about to share doesn't belong to just me. It's something that crossed borders, belief systems, and even death itself. My name is Elias Mercer. I'm 70 years old, and for most of my life, I believed only in what I could prove. I was a professor of Middle Eastern history. I taught at a respected university, gave lectures about ancient civilizations, geopolitical shifts, and religious conflicts. I read the scriptures, Torah, New Testament, Quran, but only as texts, literature, cultural artifacts. Faith, to me, was a relic, something people clung to when logic failed. My wife, Anne, had more faith than anyone I've ever met. She believed in healing, in God, in the afterlife. When the cancer came, she prayed every day. I didn't stop her, but I never joined her either, not once. And when she passed, something inside me hardened. I remember standing beside her hospice bed, looking down at her lifeless face and thinking, so this is it. This is what faith buys you. After the funeral, our son Daniel pulled away. He'd become religious years earlier, orthodox, devout. He told me he was praying for my soul. I told him not to waste his breath. We haven't spoken since. For the past 6 years, I've lived alone in a small house in the Berkshires. It's quiet here, trees, wind, old books, silence. No one knocking. No one preaching. Just me and my routine, morning tea, jazz on vinyl, long walks, and at night, well, the nights got longer. I started waking at 3 a.m., chest tight, mind spinning, memories, regrets, and one question that never stopped whispering. What if she was right? It was 2 days before winter when my heart stopped. I remember pouring tea, Earl Grey. My hand shook a little. More than usual. I reached for the sugar, and the next thing I knew, the mug had shattered on the floor and I was staring at the ceiling, paralyzed. Then everything went black, but I didn't stay in the dark for long. I became aware of my body before I saw anything. Or rather, the absence of my body. It was like I was hovering somewhere above the moment, watching myself fade. Paramedics rushed in. I saw the panic. I saw one of them press on my chest, shouting something. The air around me shimmered like heat on asphalt, and I felt free, not euphoric, not terrified, just detached, curious almost, like I had become the observer of my own story. The room fell away, the roof disappeared, and then came the silence. Not the kind that hurts your ears. This was the kind of silence that holds a presence. It wrapped around me like velvet. Everything felt still, but not empty. There was something, someone there, a presence. No face, no voice. But I knew it was aware of me, and here's where it gets strange. I wasn't afraid. I should have been, right? A lifetime of disbelief, and suddenly I'm drifting into some dimension of pure silence with an invisible observer watching me. I should have screamed, but instead I felt something else. Recognition, like I'd been here before. And then, just ahead of me, something began to form. Not a tunnel, not a light. It was a landscape, a horizon. And I knew the place. It was Jerusalem. But not the one I'd visited in my youth, not the city split by politics, soldiers and tourists. This Jerusalem was alive in a way I've never seen. It glowed, but not with sunlight. There was a warmth, like gold and fire and breath all woven together. I floated closer. The walls shimmered like heat rising from sand. I heard singing, but not from mouths. The air itself was singing, ancient languages mixed with tones I couldn't place. And I knew, somehow without question, that this city didn't exist in time. It wasn't past, it wasn't future, it simply was. And then just as I reached the gates, everything shifted. A voice, not sound but message, poured into me. You came too soon. I wanted to respond. I wanted to ask, what is this? Why am I here? What do you want from me? But I couldn't speak. I could only feel. And what I felt was this. Something is coming. Not just for me. Not just for one country or people. Something is moving, rippling through timelines, converging on one place, one nation, Israel. If you've made it this far, stay with me. What I saw next doesn't just affect believers, it affects everyone. What I'm about to describe shattered everything I thought I knew about politics, prophecy, and the very nature of time itself. I was pulled forward, not walking, not flying, just moving. The gates didn't open, they dissolved, and beyond them was something no textbook could have prepared me for. It looked like a marketplace at first, stalls of fruit, spices, rugs, pottery, but none of it was real. It was memory. Every face I passed shimmered like candlelight, people I had met, taught, dismissed, former students, my son as a boy, even Anne. She stood beside a stand of pomegranates, wearing that blue scarf she always wore in the fall. Her eyes met mine, and I tried to move toward her, but she faded. Not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't ready. And then came the scrolls. Hundreds of them, suspended mid-air, each glowing softly like paper lanterns. I couldn't read the language, but I didn't need to. I knew what they were. Histories that hadn't happened yet. Possible futures, alternate endings. One unrolled itself before me. It hovered, then turned, revealing what looked like a map. But it wasn't the world I knew. Borders shifted, nations vanished, new ones appeared. And at the center of it all, Israel. Not dominant, not destroyed, just central. A heart surrounded by fractures. I looked closer, and the scrolls zoomed in. I saw fires, screams, then silence, then something else. Children, Jewish, Arab, African, Asian, standing hand in hand on a rooftop, singing. But their mouths didn't move. The song came from the sky, and beneath their feet a crack opened in the earth, revealing something buried. A relic? A weapon? A promise? I couldn't tell. Then the scroll snapped shut and vanished. Behind me, the ground rumbled. I turned, and there they were, three figures cloaked in grey, no faces, no eyes, just presence and judgment. They didn't accuse, they didn't threaten, but I felt it. They knew me. Every paper I'd written denying the supernatural, every time I mocked my son's prayers, every quiet moment I chose bitterness over belief. Still, they didn't speak. Instead, they turned and pointed to a doorway, carved not in stone but in memory. And on the other side, I heard weeping. I stepped through. The weeping grew louder, thicker, almost physical. It wrapped around me, forced its way into my chest. Not sorrow, not guilt. Urgency. I was standing on a mountain overlooking a valley, modern and ancient at once. Skyscrapers and camels, drones and shepherds. And across the skyline, a massive shadow loomed. It wasn't human, but it wasn't a beast either. It was expectation. The sense that something had waited centuries to unfold, and the world was moments away from triggering it. And then I heard a voice again, not a command, not a threat, just a question. What will they choose? Not what will happen, not what is destined, but what will they choose? As if the future was less about prophecy and more about decision. I looked down. In my hand was a stone, smooth, warm, inscribed. It read, "Tell them." My throat burned. I wanted to scream, to ask who they were, to ask what this was. But all I could do was hold the stone and weep. If you're still here, if this story has touched something in you, drop it in the comments. Not to agree, just to show you're listening, that you still believe in meaning, that you still believe we matter, because after what I saw, I do. The moment I acknowledged that message, tell them, something shifted beneath me. The ground, if you could call it that, shimmered and bent like light over water. I wasn't falling. I was being shown. Scene after scene, folding over one another like waves, families praying in bomb shelters, men holding hands in circles on rooftops, a little girl crying beside a suitcase on the edge of a desert highway, but then celebration, a shofar echoing over a city without flags, not conquered, not divided, just unified in silence, and then fire. Not the destructive kind. This fire spoke. It danced in the skies, moved through cities. It didn't burn people, it burned lies. And as it moved, walls fell. Not physical ones, ideological ones. I heard debates dissolve into songs, hatred breaking like glass, but only in some places. In others the fire was ignored, avoided, mocked, and in those places the ground began to crack. As I watched, my perspective zoomed outward as if I were orbiting the earth itself. I saw veins of gold light spreading across the planet, like neural pathways awakening. Every time someone chose compassion or truth or sacrifice, the light spread. Every time someone chose silence in the face of cruelty, the light dimmed. It wasn't about Israel alone. It was about all of us. And yet, at the center of the web, like a beating heart pulsing light through fragile arteries, was Jerusalem. I felt myself pulled back to the city. This time it was night, not dark, just hushed, holy. I was in a garden. Olive trees swaying, soil breathing, the scent of crushed herbs in the air. A figure approached me, not shining, not glowing, just human. He sat beside me on the stone bench and didn't speak. We just sat, and in that silence I felt more love than I've ever felt in my life. Not because he did anything, but because he saw me. Not the version of me I pretended to be, the scholar, the skeptic, the self-made man, but the version buried under regret, grief, and pride. He placed a hand on my chest, not physically, spiritually, and suddenly I saw myself. As a child, reaching for my father's hand in the synagogue before I learned to roll my eyes at faith. As a teenager, watching Anne from across the classroom, the only person who ever looked at me like I was worth saving. As an old man, alone with my tea and my books, whispering, I wish I had believed in something. He looked at me, and I knew. This was the one I'd mocked, avoided, intellectualized. And yet here he was, not punishing me, just being with me. He stood, extended a hand, not to lift me, but to invite me, and the moment I touched it, I was back in the hospital, back in my fragile body, machines beeping, nurses gasping, my son Daniel at the edge of the bed, tears in his eyes. No words, just breath. And in that breath, a choice. Forget or remember, pretend or speak. If you believe in second chances, or maybe you need one, drop it in the comments. Not because I deserve your attention, but because someone out there might need your light too. We never know who's watching us for proof that there's still good left in the world. The days that followed weren't a miracle. They were messy. The machines stayed. The bruises deepened. My body remembered the trauma, even if my soul had touched something sacred. I didn't speak for almost 2 days, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't know how. How do you explain to doctors, who measure oxygen levels and brain activity, that you were handed a stone with your name on it by something that wasn't human, and yet more human than anything you've ever known? How do you tell your son, the one who stopped calling after you told him God was a crutch, that you saw a future in which children in Israel sang a song no one taught them? You don't, at least not right away. So instead, I listened to the beeps, to the nurses chatting quietly at shift change, to Daniel reading from the Psalms as if no time had passed, as if I hadn't dismissed him years ago. I watched the way his hands trembled when he closed the little leather-bound book. He looked at me like a man waiting for a door to open, a door he had knocked on for years, and for the first time in a long time I opened it. "Read that part again," I whispered. His head snapped up. He blinked. "Which part?" "The one about Israel, the watchman." He flipped quickly. "Psalm 122? I nodded. He read, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee." I don't know if I believed every word, but I felt them. And for someone like me, that was new. Later that night, long after the hallway lights dimmed and the soft hum of monitors replaced the clamor of the day, I lay in the dark and whispered one word I hadn't said in decades. "Thank you." I didn't know who I was thanking, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the act of gratitude itself was a form of belief. The next morning, a nurse asked if I remembered anything. I paused, then smiled. "Only everything." She chuckled. "That's the morphine talking." But it wasn't. That day I started writing. Not with a goal, not with a plan, just to remember, to anchor it, to give it shape. And with every word I realized something. This wasn't about proving what happened, it was about passing on what I'd been given. If you've ever felt something so real you couldn't explain it, but couldn't deny it either, leave A in the comments. Maybe your experience is waiting to meet someone else's doubt and turn it into wonder. And if you're still with me, just know, you're part of this story too. The first time I told someone outside that hospital about what I'd seen, it was a disaster. A neighbor, Ben, retired electrician, loves golf and conspiracy theories, dropped by with a thermos of chicken soup. Said he heard about my incident and figured I could use some protein. I told him thank you, sat with him on the porch, and tried to explain. 5 minutes in, he squinted at me and said, "You sure they didn't just load you up with ketamine in there?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because that was easier than admitting I didn't know how to talk about eternity without sounding insane. After he left, I sat with the thermos unopened and stared out at the trees. Was this it? Was I supposed to keep this to myself, let it rot in my chest like some divine hallucination? But then I remembered the stone. Tell them. And so I tried again. This time I wrote it down. I posted a short paragraph on a forum I used to frequent, a space for academics, thinkers, skeptics. I titled it, "A Historian's Brush with the Eternal." Within minutes, I was labeled delusional, poetic, desperate. One person messaged me privately, though. They said they'd seen something too. Not the same, but close. A moment between life and death, where the veil between worlds lifted just long enough for them to feel seen. We exchanged 3 messages, and then they disappeared. That should have discouraged me, but it didn't. It proved something. There were others out there, quiet, watching, waiting for permission to believe. So I wrote more, not to preach, just to testify. I talked about the city made of light and memory, about the faceless figures who knew me better than I knew myself, about the song in the sky, sung by children born into conflict and raised into hope. And little by little, people listened. Not many, not loudly, but they listened. A hospice nurse in Ohio, a former imam in Morocco, a Christian in São Paulo who'd lost her son in a riot. They didn't all agree on what it meant, but they agreed on this. Something is shifting. And maybe, just maybe, our stories are how we stay human in the middle of it all. If this story resonates, even just a flicker, leave a in the comments. Think of it as a signal, a way of saying, I'm listening too. Because maybe that's all faith really is. Listening. A few weeks later, I got a message from a woman named Corinne. She ran a small support group for people who'd had near-death experiences, or as she put it, moments that opened the curtain. They met in the back of a used bookstore 2 towns over. No microphones, no expectations. She'd read my post, said it sounded like more than just survival, said it sounded like assignment. I didn't reply at first. I kept her message open for 3 days, staring at it between sips of tea and glances out the window. And then I went. The room smelled like old paper and cedar. 7 chairs, a flickering lamp, a kettle on a tray. Corinne was younger than I expected. Maybe late 40s, soft voice. She welcomed me like I was a returning friend. One by one, others trickled in. A man who'd coded on an operating table. A woman who swore she saw her unborn granddaughter in a dream. A teenager who spoke like someone 100 years older than he looked. They didn't interrupt. They didn't roll their eyes. They listened. And when it was my turn, I told them everything. The city made of time. The scrolls that revealed possibilities. The song from the rooftops. The map. When I spoke about Israel, something shifted in the room. It was subtle, like air changing pressure before a storm. Corinne leaned forward. What exactly did you see? I told her about the fire that moved through cities, not to destroy, but to purify. About the hearts that glowed in gold lines across the planet, like synapses waking up. And about the shadow that waited, silent, massive, patient. She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "There are people dreaming the same thing." At that night I didn't sleep, not out of fear, out of certainty. This wasn't random, this wasn't personal, it was bigger. And the next morning, the news confirmed it. A report out of Tel Aviv, security breach at a military site, not publicized, not confirmed. But I recognized the name of the hill. It was the same one I saw children standing on in the vision. I froze. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. Enough to realize that what I'd seen wasn't just metaphor. It was message. If you've ever had that eerie moment when life starts echoing your dreams, when the impossible starts leaving fingerprints in your reality, leave A in the comments. You're not alone in that. And you were never crazy. You were just paying attention. A few days after the news out of Tel Aviv, I got an email from a man I didn't recognize. Subject line, "We need to talk about the hill." No greeting, no signature, just a phone number and a request to call. I ignored it. But it sat there in my inbox like a ticking clock. I went for a walk to clear my head. Same route as always, down the gravel road, past the abandoned chapel, under the red pines. But everything looked different now, like the light had shifted. It wasn't paranoia. It was awareness, like I'd been blind and now saw the outlines behind the world, the structure beneath the noise. Back home, I brewed a fresh cup of tea and sat staring at that email again. Something told me, this isn't a threat. It's a test, so I called. A quiet voice answered, middle-aged, calm, no introduction, just, I know you saw the map. He didn't ask what I'd seen. He knew. He told me things I hadn't published. Specifics, locations, fragments of language I hadn't spoken aloud since the hospital. He said he wasn't part of any group or government. He said he was a watcher, someone who collected testimonies like mine, then looked for convergence. Too many people are seeing fire, he said. Too many are dreaming of gates opening and children singing from walls. He paused, and they all mention Israel. I asked him what it meant. He said, it means we don't have time to stay quiet. I hung up and sat in silence for what felt like an hour. Then I wrote 3 words in my notebook. It begins now. But what was beginning? Revelation? Collapse? A great unveiling or a final warning? I didn't know. What I did know was this. If I kept this to myself, I'd rot from the inside out. Not because I needed to be believed, but because the message wasn't mine to keep. So I opened my laptop and began writing again. Not like before, not anonymous, not careful. This time I used my name. I told the story in full, every strange detail, every impossible image, every moment that burned itself into my soul like truth branded on skin. I clicked publish, then closed the computer, and waited. If you've ever felt that sick mix of purpose and fear in your gut, like stepping off a cliff, knowing you were meant to fall, leave A in the comments, because sometimes the scariest thing in the world isn't dying, it's finally speaking. The reaction came faster than I expected. Within hours, my inbox filled. Some called me insane, others called me dangerous, but a few, just a few, wrote things I couldn't ignore. One woman said she dreamed of the same song, children's voices, no mouths moving, no source, just melody pouring from the sky. A man from Argentina sent a sketch, a hill, a crack in the earth, a relic buried beneath what looked like olive trees. He didn't know about my vision. He'd never read my posts. He just wrote, I saw this twice. I don't know what it means, but I woke up weeping both times. Another message from someone who refused to share their name simply read, the scrolls are real. You're not alone. Stay safe. Stay safe. Why did that part stay with me? I wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But something had changed. That night I dreamed again, not like before, calm and glowing. This was urgent, shaking. I stood in a room filled with clocks. None of them had hands. They just ticked, rapidly, loudly. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat. A door opened behind me and a wind blew through, filled with ash and jasmine. In the center of the room was a figure, cloaked, silent, holding a torch. They didn't speak. They just pointed. And behind them, a map. But this time, it was different. It wasn't a map of nations. It was a map of hearts, glowing, flickering, some barely lit, some blazing. Lines connected them like constellations. And at the center again, Israel, but smaller now, dimmer. The torch trembled. I woke up gasping. For the first time since the hospital, I felt fear, not for myself, for all of us. I sat up in bed and wrote what I could remember, the torch, the map, the ticking. Then I circled one word in red. Dimming. Something was losing light, something we needed to remember or restore. I didn't know how, not yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever was coming wouldn't wait for belief. It would come because it had to. And whether we were ready or not, we'd have to face it. If you're still here, if something deep in your gut is telling you, this isn't just a story, leave A in the comments, a single flame, to show you're still listening, still watching, still willing to see. The next morning, everything felt louder. The wind through the trees, the sound of my breath, even the ticking of the old wall clock I used to ignore. It was like the world had turned up its volume trying to get my attention. So I paid attention. I reread the messages. I looked over my notes. I tried to trace the pattern, but the pattern wasn't on the paper. It was inside me, that sense of being pulled, not by fear, not by ego, but by assignment. I remembered the faceless figures, the map, the stone that said, "Tell them." And suddenly I realized I hadn't told them everything. There was a part I'd buried, even from myself, a detail from the vision I hadn't written down, hadn't said out loud, because it terrified me, because it sounded like prophecy. I remembered standing in the garden right before I woke up, the olive trees, the scent in the air, and the figure beside me, human but not, present but infinite. He had whispered something, not with words, with understanding. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even complete, but it stayed in me like a chord waiting to resolve. When the mountain sings, the veil will break. That was it, just that. I didn't understand it, but I felt it in my bones. Something was waiting to be revealed. And not in some distant mystical dimension, here, soon. And Israel wasn't just a location, it was the hinge, the place where the curtain between heaven and earth had always been thinnest, a place of beginning, and maybe of reckoning. I sat on my porch that night, the wind colder than usual, and for the first time in a long time, I prayed. Not to be spared, not to be seen, just to be useful. I whispered, "If I'm supposed to speak, show me how." And right then, my phone lit up. A message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, my son, Daniel. 2 words, still listening. If you're still listening too, still sensing the shift, still watching the sky for signs, leave A in the comments. A waning moon, to mark the space between what we see and what we're about to understand. That night, I dreamed again. But this time, I wasn't just observing. I was inside it, inside the garden, inside the silence before the veil tears. The city of light returned, Jerusalem, but now under twilight, not dark, not bright, just waiting. I walked alone, barefoot on the stone. The wind carried voices, not words but pulses of emotion, grief, hope, awe. And then I heard it, a sound I couldn't name, low, deep, like the earth itself was beginning to hum. The mountain was singing, not in melody, in vibration, a tremble that shook the leaves and lit the horizon in amber. And in that moment, the sky cracked, not violently, not catastrophically, just opened. And what poured through wasn't destruction. It was clarity. Memories of humanity, wars, feasts, mothers giving birth, fathers weeping in secret, children laughing in dirt roads, centuries of choice, all happening at once. And at the center still was Israel, small, fragile, burning with light and pressure, like the center of a star. Then came the whisper again, "When the mountain sings, the veil will break." And suddenly I understood. It wasn't about watching anymore. It was about responding. We are the hinge, not just me, not just prophets or mystics. All of us. The world isn't waiting for permission to unfold. It's waiting for alignment, not of politics, of hearts. I woke with tears on my face, not fear, reverence, the kind you feel standing at the edge of something eternal and being asked to take a step. So now I ask you, not to believe blindly, not to follow me, but to remember the light, the tremble, the invitation. If any part of your life has ever felt like it brushed against the divine, if you've ever sensed that something is being asked of you, quietly, humbly, leave A in the comments, not for me, for you, to mark the moment your story began to shift too. I don't know what happens next, not for the world, not for Israel, not even for me. I only know that something sacred touched me on the other side of silence and asked me to remember, not to convert, not to convince, just to carry it forward. And maybe that's what stories like this are for, not to be believed, but to be felt, to stir something that's already inside you, waiting. I've told you everything I could. I've opened the scrolls of my soul, risked my comfort, my reputation, my quiet little life, because something in that garden, something behind that veil, looked me in the eyes without having a face and said, "Tell them while there's still time." So, this is me telling you, and if this story has planted even a small seed in your heart, water it, watch it, don't walk away too fast, because maybe the next sign won't be a dream. Maybe it will be you. Maybe you're the one who's meant to carry this light next. If you've felt that, if something inside you whispered, yes, even for a second, leave A in the comments. That's how we'll know who's still awake, who's still watching the mountain, and who, like me, is choosing to remember. Thank you for listening. Truly, wherever you are, whoever you are, stay alive, stay open, and when the song begins, don't look away.